With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
So you might have heard tell that it's 4th of July and Independence Day in America, and like a lot of families, our family's going to go get together. And it's going to be a really special time, especially after a year plus of pandemic and protocols and social distancing and having to be cautious. Last year's 4th of July just didn't quite feel the same. So like a lot of people in America, it's really time to enjoy ourselves, but also to reflect a little bit. Well, the other part of our Independence Day, where America celebrates their independence from being a British colony, we thought it'd be fun to take this time of thankfulness and reflection and talk to one of our friends that are British, our buddy Ben Harris from across the pond. So this episode of Heard Tell is going to be from up yonder in West Virginia, where I'm celebrating my family, to over yonder, to London, England, where Ben works in politics. He works around the halls of Parliament and power, and to kind of get an outsider view of some of the things we've been talking about in American culture and politics. We'll talk about some of the differences. We'll even talk a little bit of soccer, football for those folks, and how things like racism in sports and politics and culture over there is different than it is here, how their system of government's a little different. And we'll also talk about how the special relationship between England and America has always been there, and how we need to do some things with some of the political and cultural challenges today to make sure it stays that way. So on this Independence Day weekend, we're recording this on July the 4th. Whenever you listen to it, be thankful for the special relationship for what used to be our enemies, England, the British. The British are coming on Heard Tell. Our buddy Ben Harris talking culture and politics from the view from over yonder right after this. And I'm thrilled to be joined by our friend from over yonder across the pond, Ben Harris. How are you, sir?
Good, thank you. Thanks for having me on. It's good to I've sort of listened to clips of yours before, and it's good to be on here.
I'm thrilled you took the time for us. It's kind of cool because we've actually been trying to get together for a couple of weeks, but it just worked out. We're doing this on the 4th of July, so it's kind of interesting on the 4th of July to have the over there perspective of what's going on in American culture and politics. Let's just start right there. Is it kind of funny in England when we have our big 4th of July celebration? How does that land? We're all friends now. We talk about the special relationship. We have our jokes about, you blowing a 13-colony lead, that sort of thing. But what do they think about our little holiday over here?
I mean, a few years ago, I don't think it was really. I mean, when I was growing up as a kid, it wasn't really a thing. But obviously, because of the internet and social media, we've sort of become more aware of it, and we like to make jokes and stuff like that. But obviously, I mean, most people here, we love Americans, especially me. I've always been a big fan, and it's sort of a lot of American traditions are sort of becoming more well known in the UK. I think Thanksgiving is another one. So I think a lot of it we just sort of look on it with sort of amusement, with the fireworks and all those sort of things you like to do, and it's good to have that because we don't really have an Independence Day. We don't have one because we never became independent from anyone else, if you know what I mean.
Right, and a lot of people don't realize in your parliamentarian system, you don't really have an equivalent to our constitutional system. Y'all kind of change it as you go, so it's more of an amalgamation over history of how the English parliamentary system has been built up, as opposed to us where we kind of have a hard and fast date, and then we have our founding documents. It's very different for the British people, isn't it?
Well, ours is officially, it's funny, it's officially sort of unwritten, but there'll often be references to things being constitutional, not as much as over there, of course, but we do talk about things in a constitutional aspect. So that's quite confusing. And honest with you, I work in politics, and I probably couldn't tell you what would be classed as constitutional and what wouldn't. It's as you said, it's just a complete amalgamation. I think there's lots of basic tenets of it, and many things are similar to the US, freedom of speech, that sort of things, but there are differences as well.
Now, it's interesting, too, for us to watch from the outside before we get your opinion on us. A lot of people first kind of found out about this stuff watching the BREXIT thing over the last few years. I know me and one of my kids, we'd always listen to Prime Minister Questions on Wednesday morning because that's right about the time we did the car line at school, so we'd always listen to Prime Minister Questions on Wednesday.
That's right, yeah. It's Wednesday at 12 o'clock. Every Wednesday.
But that's the thing that was so different was the reason they discuss some of that, because whatever Parliament passes, that's with some exceptions with the higher courts and stuff. That's pretty much the law, and that's pretty much it in the
Yeah,
British
yeah.
system.
There is no separation of powers. So you have the government, and they're all the ministers. So, for example, like our equivalent of your Secretary of State, Defence Secretary, they're all MPs, and the Prime Minister, of course, is also an MP. So they have their own constituencies, and it's all part of one. And there isn't as much. If a government's got a big majority, there isn't as much. They don't need to do things like pork barrel. They don't really need to do much trade offs. They're just steamroll through what they have because that's how it works. Of course, that has benefits and also has drawbacks.
And one of those drawbacks, of course, is you get something like the Brexit mess, which seemed to drag on for forever. It took, 3, 4, 5 years now. But then one of the positives of it is you can do something like Brexit, where they finally got it done and they completely changed something, even though it took 2 or 3 years to do it. Before we get back to American stuff, it's been a year and a half, almost 2 years now. How's the Brexit stuff landing? I know they're working right now on some of the foreign policy stuff, and foreign aid's a big thing in Parliament right now going on. But just general public, has it died down? Is it still kind of a smoldering ember waiting to be flared up again? How's it landing locally in England?
I think it could be a potential flashpoint. It's something that could always come up again in future, but I think it's nowhere near as big as it was. I mean, I'd say probably from that entire period, especially sort of 2017 to 2019, that general election, there was complete deadlock. Not just in terms of the parties, because obviously, as you know, we had an election and it was a hung parliament. It was just deadlock everywhere. It was deadlock in Parliament. Parliament itself, I think it could agree that it didn't like the Prime Minister's deal, but it couldn't agree on anything else. And as a result, we had a sort of year or two of just pure deadlock, and it was just a nightmare. And it dominated politics, dominated society. It has died down now. The issue itself is a constantly changing thing. Brexit will never be done as such, but it's at least now been put onto the next stage, whereas before it was just completely stuck, and we didn't even know if it was going to happen. There was talks of it being overturned or a second referendum, and it was just pure uncertainty. At least now we have, as Donald Rumsfeld said, we have known unknowns. Before it was unknown unknowns, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, nice reference to the recently departed Donald Rumsfeld. Is it like in American politics where at some point the deadlock gets to the point where people almost, it's not that they don't care anymore, but they're just like, all right, we can't just keep doing deadlock. We have to do something. And then it's just kind of like the pressure breaks and they're like, okay, on with it.
I think that's what happened with the election. The second election, so the first election was the first snap election. So this was an election that wasn't planned. The Prime Minister sort of called it, the one that Theresa May called in 2017. That was before all the Brexit stuff had sort of debate had been had, and that's probably why there's a hung parliament. Whereas when Boris Johnson did his 2.5 years later, everyone was so fed up, and obviously Corbyn was very unpopular. And I think his whole "Get Brexit Done" message which was what the election was fought on. That was what allowed him to get such a big majority. That was such a powerful motivator. I think people just wanted it done and sorted. And obviously, you can disagree or agree how well it's been sorted, but it's been, at least, as I said, moved on to the next stage now.
Yeah. All right, fair's fair. Time for you to give us a little grief. Our president just spent better part of 2 weeks over yonder with you folks in Europe. The G7 conference, which has 8 or 9 people in it. But that's another matter for another day. How's it been landing over there? We had our mess with our own elections, the real messy after election stuff, the January 6th stuff with the Capitol stuff, and the riots that occurred. How is the perception of our friends over there of American culture and politics right now? We've got about 6 months of Joe Biden, somebody who's very familiar with the press over there because he was vice president for 8 years. I think when he met the Queen the other day, I think they said it was his 6th meeting with the Queen. So somebody that's very familiar name-wise to you folks. How's it been landing the last 6 months or so as they view American culture and politics from afar?
I think it's gone back to the Obama days. And of course, I've always said this when it comes to American politics here, at least since the Bush days, it's always been a case of that sort of Republican is sort of viewed as by default as being bad, Democrats good. And now, of course, me personally, I liked Bush, I didn't like Trump, but it followed that pattern. It was a case of, it was sort of viewed as American politics was viewed as a circus. And I think in this case, it was justifiably viewed as a circus under Trump. Whereas now it seems to be, it doesn't get as much courage anymore. It's just taking a back seat. Biden, of course, is a known quantity. He's more predictable, which of course is good in some ways, bad in other ways. I think if you poll people on Biden, most who have heard of him would say they liked him. They probably couldn't tell you why they liked him, but he's obviously just seen as a of a dining down from Trump. I mean, personally, I don't mind him, I guess, but I don't think he'd be a great president, but he's more nondescript. He's hard to have an opinion on, really. He's quite bland, which is probably in a way a good thing in these days.
Does he come across to folks that are not Americans overseas as just kind of, oh, he's just kind of the medium of what we perceive American to be and an American president to be? Is it that sort of a thing?
Yeah, I mean, in every way, he looks like an American president, and I don't mean that in a good or a bad way. He just looks like a sort of a nondescript sort of American president you'd see in a film or a TV show, and I think it's come across that way. It's As I said, it's not really getting much coverage now. Biden he's known. I think he's known for his Irish sort of comments and links, and there are a few on the right here who sort of view him as a sort of secret IRA sympathizer, which I think is nonsense. But on the whole, I think most people don't have strong opinions on him. He doesn't elicit that kind of opinion that Bush or Trump did, or even to an extent Obama did. Because people here love Obama. I don't really understand why, but
Oh yeah.
they love him. Whereas Biden, I just get the impression people just are sort of meh about him.
Do they follow American? I know American pop culture is kind of omnipresent in the world right now, especially since the social media age. But is it one of those things where it's kind of like the crazy cousin almost? It's like, all right, we want to see you from time to time. We just don't want to hear about you constantly. And it felt like the last 4 or 5 years, it was just not even agree or disagree. It was just like, okay, just settle down. We don't want to hear any more for a while.
Yeah, I think it got to that point. But of course, the thing is, politics-wise, it was seen as sort of an interesting sort of TV show for us, for a lot of people. But interestingly, there's, of course, beyond politics, there's a sort of cultural discourse, which a lot of people over here actually are becoming annoyed with, is that it's sort of coming over from America. So you've got American racial sort of discourse. A good example is the police. So for example, here, there is very, very, very few examples of police killing anybody. It just doesn't happen very often. And police violence just, although there are issues with the police, it's not the same as in the US. It's a completely different dynamic. But last summer, we had a very similar dynamic to the whole Black Lives Matter thing. And it just wasn't really applicable here. It didn't really carry over. And I think a lot of people are sort of, this stuff is coming over. And obviously, it's not Americans' fault. It's social media. You guys aren't deliberately sending it over here. It's just coming over. And I think there's this view that there's a lot of stuff in American culture which is sort of fusing with our culture. And it's just causing a lot of confusion, I think.
And that's where you get things like the English national team taking a knee and people booing. And then folks had to try to explain, like, no, this is why they're booing them taking the knee. It's this and this, and the rejection of why. That's complicated because people just see it. They put the two things together and they don't understand there's a cultural problem there because there's a disconnect.
I mean, the problem at first was that when it first came over last year, they had Black Lives Matter on the shirt. They had the logo on the side of their shirts. It went full on, and it was sort of intertwined with Black Lives Matter as a political movement. And then later on, there was more attention brought to racism in football, as it should be, because racism in football is still a problem. It's not gone away. And now it has become a more generalized. And I think the route they should have gone down from the beginning was, let's make it about racism in football. Not, obviously the issues in America are important, but what's more applicable to here is the racism in football. And I think they made a mistake by how they put it across. But certainly now, I think the booing and the knee taking, I just think it's a bit silly. I mean, personally, if they want to kneel, then that's fine. That's their choice. It's 2 seconds before a game. It really doesn't affect me. I'm really more concerned about who's playing and how they're playing. I don't really care if they kneel before the game or not, to be honest with you.
And the policing actions, and now they had the big scandal with the young lady. They had I forget her name.
Sarah Everard, yeah.
Yeah, and there was accusations of corruption, and folks can look that up on their own. It's not that there isn't issues with the police in London and elsewhere in the UK. Yeah. It's, I guess the point was they tried to make something that would be universal for social media instead of specific to the actual issues in the various areas, when policing in the UK is very, very different than policing in America, especially in London.
That's right, yeah.
Because the London police is its own... The London police is actually, it's like its own little country. Explain that to folks because they don't understand. Like, London's such a big city, but the police force and the way London is governed is really, really unique in how the rest of the world works, isn't it?
Well, with police in the UK, it's quite confusing because you've got, for the most part, it's counties. Counties have their own police forces, although in Scotland they have the single police force. So that's a separate matter. But in terms of the UK, As far as I'm aware, it's essentially every county has. So a county is a bit like a state, I guess. It's not like a county in the US. Of course, that's
Right,
worth
right, right.
pointing out. A county in the US is obviously, as you would know, is very different to a county here. A county here is sort of equivalent to a state to an extent. So every county will have its own police force, but London's got its own police force. So it's, but I think also Manchester has as well. So it does vary, and London is governed sort of, it has its own powers that say other cities don't. So, for example, there are lots of cities in the UK which are still run by a local council, whereas London has its own assembly, and I think they in turn has its own mayor who has its own powers, and the mayor of London has got a lot of powers over certain sort of things, and it runs differently to how a ceremonial mayor of another city, because a lot of mayors here are just ceremonial, whereas London they have real control over things. And police, of course, the Met Police, they have their own remit, they have their own budget, and it's separate from other police forces. And it's quite confusing. And but as you said, the police here have their own issues. The Sarah Everard case was a perfect example of that, and that was a more British example. That was organic. That wasn't just sort of something that was transplanted over. That did that was an anger over the way so many sexual assault cases just go unconvicted or uninvestigated, and that was a real issue.
And that is a universal issue. It seems like if you want to get a universal one, that's a good one to do because we certainly are seeing it here. We see it. I know locally where I live, there's been a massive school scandal in the Wilmington, New Hanover County school districts of the school
Mm.
system covering up abuse. Of course, you have it in church groups. We just saw it in the Southern Baptist Convention, the Catholic Church School, and in government too. So if you wanted to have a universal issue, that would seem like a good one to start with, especially where it comes to police. So
That is a good point, yeah. But of course, what the issue that did come over was the whole sort of police targeting of minority groups, which, although I think it does still happen in the UK, obviously, the extent to which it's institutionalized, as far as I'm aware, is nowhere near as widespread. And as of course, as I said, when it comes to police killing people, people dying at the hands of police is very quite rare here.
yeah, but we do see, I watch, I'm a football, soccer for us fan.
Yeah.
I've seen it. It happened. Actually saw it in person in Germany years and years ago.
Oh,
You,
hooliganism.
yeah, you don't see it. The first time I was in Germany was '01 to '04 kind of time frame when the hooligan stuff was really not good. I've
Mm.
seen where they had to do completely closed stadiums and having games just because of racism. That's not something you actually see in America where it's like we have to
Yeah,
clear the
that's
whole
true.
stadium out. But that
That's
still
very,
occurs a lot of time in Europe, especially in some of the Eastern Bloc areas, doesn't it?
Yeah, especially Eastern Europe. It's not as much of a problem here. It still is a problem, but in comparison, it's worse in Eastern Europe. And that's the thing. Europe has its racist issues. They're just different. They just express themselves in different ways, and it's obviously it's different histories. A good example people always bring up is Roma and Gypsy communities. They get absolutely horrendous treatment in certain parts of Eastern Europe, where of course in the US it's just you probably don't even really get that many Roma or Gypsy groups because it's sort of an Eastern European ethnic group. So
Right.
no, you're correct. Yeah, and when it comes to racism in sport here, especially in parts of Eastern Europe, and but again, it still happens here as well. You do get things which just don't happen in the US. You will get racist abuse at sports matches, and I mean, up until sort of the 2000s, it was very widespread. As far as from what I've read, it was almost accepted, and it's only really the last 20 years that it's been clamped down on. But even now, there's still more to be done.
Do you think social media is one of those things that actually this is an area where it's improving because it's not just the hooligans at the match, the whole world sees every time that happens now, and folks just
Yes,
kind of recoil from it?
absolutely, yeah. I mean, back in the sort of the 80s and 90s, when racism in football, even here in the UK, was sort of widespread, and it was just seen as part of the game. There are lots. Obviously, there were loads of instances then which would have gone unrecorded because there was no smartphones, there was no chemicals were huge, and it was a bit bulky to carry around. Whereas now, of course, they usually find them on social media, and I think racism in football is a lot better than it used to be, and racism in sport in general. But of course, the instances that do come up, they do get very widely shared. So I think there's a perception that maybe racism in football is really bad right now, or as worse as it's ever been. When actually, um, it's it's obviously still there, unfortunately, but it's still an improvement from sort of the 70s and 80s, where also football hooliganism as well was really bad. I mean, football, obviously I wasn't alive then, but football hooliganism and racism in football was awful back in those days, and it's a lot better now.
Talking about perceptions, there's always, anytime we switch presidents over here, there's a big thing about, oh, our perception in the world is this, that, and the other. What is the U.S. perception right now? I know you said President Biden's kind of seen as the kind of a return to norm for an American president.
Yeah.
Like you said, he looks like central casting the BBC would pick out for an American president. But what is our perception? We have the Afghanistan drawdown that's just really weeks away from being done. They just turned over Bagram here in the last few days as we're recording this. What is Americans' perception? Because we Americans, we always like to be very proud, like, oh, we export freedom, we export, liberty, this, that, and the other. What is it for you guys, though, looking back this way at us? What is the perception of what we're exporting to the rest of the world right now, besides pop culture?
From a UK perspective, as I said, it usually varies based on the party of the president. So when Bush was in power, it was seen as, unilateral, imposing its will on everyone else, and that's obviously not my view, but that's what it was seen by a lot of people here. It was seen as just ignoring everyone else and just doing its own thing. And then when Obama came in, it was seen as sort of more of a good thing. And then once again with Trump, it was seen as, again, ignoring everyone, doing its own thing. And then with Biden, it's sort of flipped back to it's a very partisan lens, I think. Here it's not as overtly partisan, but people generally see it as a Democrat president as sort of being nice and engaging with the world, and the Republican as being isolationist and unwilling to cooperate, which of course, although that was the case in my opinion with Trump, it wasn't with Bush, but that was nonetheless the perception people had here. But yeah, I think most people here are still positive towards America. We still see you as our main allies, and if we were going to do something in the world militarily, most people here understand that we need your support. We couldn't do it on our own anymore.
Yeah, I was going to say, I saw a whole lot of British troops I worked with in Iraq, so we weren't completely on our own there, despite the perception, and elsewhere around the world. One of those things where we probably need to be working on more is a lot of press coverage here, how President Biden is going to be dealing with Russia. England very much has the Putin-led Russia on the mind lately. Of course, they had the attacks on press and other Russian figures inside the UK that they targeted directly. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline has been in the news that the Biden administration is kind of going to let that go forward unchallenged. This is one of the real geopolitical foes for England and America both, and NATO ain't quite what it used to be. How is that? Is that one of those things that we need to work together on? Is that the feeling in England that we really need to be a team on the Russia front?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when it comes to Russia, the way we see Russia, for example, is very similar to how the Americans see it. I know that in Europe, in some European countries, they're a lot more pro-Russia, or at least not as hawkish as we are. Germany, for example, because they're right on their doorstep and they've got the whole Nord Stream thing. Here, we very much see them as an aggressor, not just because of Salisbury and what happened there, but because of just their actions in general. Yeah, there is. I do agree with you there. We do need to work together more. And when it comes to sort of the divide between how Russia is seen and how other sort of geopolitical enemies are seen, I think the divide isn't between America and Europe. I think it's between possibly the Anglo-Saxon world and the other parts of Europe, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. And for people who don't know, Salisbury was where Russia poisoned people with the plutonium poisoning, and used the one that everybody would know was there. It's kind of a calling card attack where, Putin can smile and go, of course we didn't have anything to do with it, but they're the only ones that do it that way. That's what you're referring to with Salisbury. Yeah,
and civilians end up getting caught up in that. So they targeted an ex-Russian agent or something. They targeted a Russian, but a police officer, I think, and his wife ends up getting caught up in it and got seriously ill. And obviously it was seen, rightly so, as an attack on the UK, not just an attack on an individual, but an attack on all of us.
What other foes are on the horizon for England that maybe the Americans aren't paying attention to? I know there's a lot of far-right activity in Europe. France looks, they might have put theirs down a little bit, but they're still going to have an election about it. What else is out there that we should pay attention to as friends of yours?
I think we have similar outlooks. I think China is becoming more important now. And until recently, until a couple of years ago, China, I think we were probably more pro-China than the US. But then again, I think a lot of people have woken up to China. I remember 6 years ago, there was a state visit by Xi Jinping, and he got the red carpet treatment. And our ex-chancellor actually is very pro-China. So Chancellor, he's like the economic sort of secretary. He was very pro-China. and he tried to get a lot of Chinese investment, and we had the Huawei thing. But I think, along with everyone else, we've sort of seen the true nature of the Chinese government, and we've now taken a harder stance on them. So I think that's probably more in line with the US now. In terms of the far right, we've actually been historically, we've been quite insulated from it. We've never had a strong far right here. Not like, say, in France or Germany, we don't get far right parties getting 10, 15% of the vote anymore. We don't really get that. Yeah, I think our sort of threats are similar to how you guys would see them. I can't think of many which you wouldn't know about, which we would. Obviously, you've got localized ones. Obviously, the IRA and Irish separatism, that's always been an issue, but that's a local issue. That's not an international one.
We can't talk about extremes without being fair. The attack on our own capital, the riots on January 6th, how did that play over there watching it from afar? Because I know how I felt about it, but I'm an American. I'm always proud of my country. That wasn't a proud moment for us. How did it play over there?
No, it wasn't. I mean, obviously, for me, as someone who's always been very keen in America, I was horrified by it. But likewise, people who aren't as into politics as I am, it was seen as quite bad. I mean, the scenes of just what happened, it was no, I didn't see many people supporting it. Put it that way. It was. I think most people saw it for what it was. It was an attempted insurrection. It was disgraceful. Yeah, it was seen as very bad, and I think it's a shame actually, because it will always go down as that dark stain on America's history that day, and it's a real shame because I don't want people to associate that with America. I think America is more than that, but people will inevitably and understandably they will associate that now with America and American democracy.
Now, I say that way that, there was some people there that was there for the insurrection. There was a bunch of people there just caused trouble. It's a complicated thing, but it's a horrible look. It's a bad thing for my country. We're saying all those things, and I know you're a American sympathizing and you're a good friend of ours, but just a general European, are they looking at that? Are they shocked because it's America and they thought it was better, or is it that kind of reaction, or what was the reaction to just the common person of like, really, them too?
I think it is. That is sort of there's a view over the past few years which is sort of America is now more unreliable. Personally, I don't necessarily buy that, but they sort of see the political upheaval in America, and it's America is sort of seen as a more just unreliable. I think it's a view in Europe is quite common now, is that sort of the EU is becoming more integrated, and it's sort of seen as well, America's got all their own problems. We need to sort ourselves out. Obviously, the UK is no longer in the EU anymore, but that's quite a common view you hear now. It's becoming more common to hear European politicians say that they need to sort of go their own way, and they shouldn't have to rely on America anymore.
How realistic is that from somebody? You're in the halls of Parliament professionally. You're kind of plugged in. How realistic is that from England? Is there a fear that you're going to kind of wind up getting stuck in the middle with a Europe drawing away from America and still needing America, but still needing Europe too?
I mean, we've always had that. I actually did my dissertation on this, my postgraduate dissertation. I did it on the US-UK special relationship.
I teed that up good, didn't I?
Yeah, it was quite good. This is post Cold War. This was actually done 2015, so it was just before Trump and things. It was just before Trump, just before Brexit, just before things got really crazy. But historically, we've always been a bridge to Europe. Between America and Europe, because we have that different connection, because you guys are essentially descended from us, as it were. At least that's the way I see it. Politically, the US is sort of a descendant of the UK, and there's always a fear of us. What is our place in the world? Because we used to be obviously this huge empire. We know we're not anymore, and a lot of Brits. There's been an ongoing struggle for decades to sort of discern where exactly is our place in the world. Where should it be with? Some would say with America. Some would say with the EU. Some would say, apart from not both of them. Me personally, I would say we should be more towards America, and I think, but of course, we shouldn't forget that the EU is always going to be, and Europe in general is always going to be on our doorstep. They're always going to be a big trading partner, so it'd be foolish to just completely cut them off or be antagonistic. I mean, the EU as an institution, I'm not keen on, and I do feel they are quite antagonistic themselves. But we mustn't forget, of course, that Europe, they're our allies and they're not enemies. So yeah, it's just navigating that balance, and I think us being out of the EU does change things somewhat. But at the end of the day, the sort of geopolitical realities of the world are very much similar to what they were before Brexit. So Yeah, I think it's just maintaining a balance between them. But I would always be in favour of staying close to the US because their values are very similar to ours and their interests are often very similar to ours. Not always the same, but what's good for the US is usually what's good for the UK and vice versa.
Yeah, well, to end this on a happy note, I'm going to go to a big old cookout here in about an hour to celebrate the fall of the empire. No offense, but here's your shot. Everybody's always, we're big on food. We do the Twitter Supper Club. Here's your shot. Everybody's always bashing British food. I think it's unfair. I've been to England a couple of times. I found the food to be pretty good. What's the American food that just absolutely recoils you, and you're like, my God, what is that thing when you look at it? Like, what are you people eating over there?
I'm just trying to think. To be honest, I'm quite picky when it comes to food. So there's probably lots of British food and American food I recoil from. Um, I have to say I'm not a big fan of cheese or the kind of cheese you do over there. So, for example, I'm going to get absolutely slated for this, but I'll admit it. I don't care. I went to Philadelphia a few years ago and I ordered a Philly cheesesteak
Oh
without
no.
the cheese. And the look of
Without
disgust
wait, wait,
I
wait.
got.
You ordered a Philly cheesesteak in. Were you at Pat's or Geno's or?
I was actually in the airport.
Oh
I'd forgotten
no.
to get one before, but I was in the airport and she still gave me a look of absolute disgust when I said, "Can I just have no cheese, please?"
You ordered a Philly cheesesteak in Philly at the airport from a Philadelphian local and asked for no cheese.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Oh man, I don't think since Concord and Lexington has it almost come to blows like that.
No, I
That's
mean,
pretty
I
bad.
know that Americans. And then there's that woman. I think she was an American in the UK, and she was doing this thing with tea where I don't know, she was doing it funny. She was microwaving or something. A lot of people here didn't like that. Personally, I didn't care because I don't like tea. Tea is just all the same to me. I don't drink tea or coffee. So you guys can butcher tea all you like, as far as I care.
I drink a little bit of tea, but I'm not allowed to have coffee because of GI issues, and I don't really like coffee anyway, so it didn't bother me. But I use the Keurig. I'll just be upfront.
Yeah, yeah.
Keurig honey, a little bit of milk in it. I can do a little tea from time to time, but
But I have to say, the American perception of British food, I don't really know where it comes from. I mean, I wouldn't say our cuisine is the best in the world, but it's
yeah,
not
it's
bad.
good.
And certainly things like beans on toast, that's not as common as people might think it is. I've
No,
never had it myself, but it's not. Yeah, it's roast dinner is what roast dinner and fish and chips is what you should think of when it comes to British cuisine, not beans on toast.
and for me, where I grew up in the country, with like I'd send out pictures on my social media. We had hot dog toppings out of the crock. But it's more like if you grew up with country food or what we call comfort food in America, it's a lot of
Mm,
stuff similar to that. It's kind of make do with what you got. So it's good. It's perfectly fine. It's not hot cuisine kind of and that's the French hot, not the
yeah.
hot hot. For those of you from Logan, um, it's if you just started out with it being it's more comfort kind of common folk food, then I don't think you have a drop off because I found it to be really good when I was over there.
Yeah, I mean, we do have some weird food here. I don't know if you check it out. There's a Twitter account. I think it's called Rate My Plate, and it's a British one. They mostly get British submissions. Uh, there is some weird stuff on there, I have to say, and I would advise anyone listening to this to check that account out for a good laugh because they do have some really bizarre stuff on there. But just remember that is not representative of us.
Yeah, like Chip Bunting is not a football player. That's actually something they eat. So fries on
Exactly.
what we call French fries on bread, fun stuff like that.
I always find it weird how you guys call coriander cilantro. I never understood that. It took me a long time to work out what cilantro actually was.
Oh, in my house it's basil and basil. And
Yeah,
it
yeah.
comes because my family, my kids especially, they love Gordon Ramsay shows. So it's
Okay.
basil and basil, and that always turns into a big fight in our house. And then you mess around and say it enough, you switch and start saying it the other way, and then everybody jumps your case. So
Yeah, yeah.
and there's a few other pronunciations, but I always get a kick listening to like prime minister questions, just how things are, like schemes. Like every government thing's a scheme. Well, everything's a
Oh
government
God,
scheme
yeah.
over here too, but scheme has a different connotation.
Oh
So
God,
things
don't
like
get me
that.
started on the political buzzwords. And it's of course in Prime Minister's questions as well. You have this weird ritual where often backbenchers from the governing party will have a sort of question they'll ask, but it's not a question. It's just them saying, "Will the Prime Minister agree with me that this government policy has worked?" And it's essentially they're not asking a question. They're just doing a ritualistic backslapping. And it's sort of
Yeah.
that's part of the parliamentary system, and it's probably something you don't get in the US, and you'd find it very weird if it happened in Congress, I imagine.
Oh, we get them. We just do them in congressional hearings when the cameras are on, where they have a quote unquote question and they just basically rant for their allotted period of time. Theresa May, whatever else you thought about her, she was great with those backbend questions. She always found out some way to have a little bit of fun with them.
Oh yeah, Theresa May's very. She's got a very dry wit. She's very good at fighting for what she believes in, and she won't. She's not the sort of person that would just blindly follow the government. She will stand up for what she believes in, which I can respect that.
Yeah, she was great at those because she was like, "Well, of course I'll come to your small town and ride your railway station. Of course I will." And she just
I
kind
mean,
of passed
yeah,
it off that way.
she's been doing that for a long time. She's been around. So often, prime ministers Tony Blair and David Cameron, they basically left Parliament as soon as they just stepped down as MPs and prime minister.
Oh, she's still
Whereas
there. I
Theresa
just saw her
May,
the other day doing something. Yeah,
yeah,
she's still in
she
Parliament.
stuck around. Gordon Brown did for a while as well. I think Ted Heath is another one. So Ted Heath was our prime minister in the 70s, and I believe he was an MP up until 2001. So he stayed around for decades afterwards, and it's quite good to have that experience there because often I'll just go to the Lords, but you won't really see them in the Lords. So yeah, I do like it when prime ministers stick around, and I hope Boris Johnson does the same when he eventually leaves.
Well, he was a little different because he came, even though he's a member of Parliament, obviously, but his rise to fame was through Mayor of London.
It was, yeah, it was.
So
that's
his
right. Yeah,
path was a little different. So I'm actually kind of curious when he's done with his premiership. What's he going to do after that? It should be interesting
my
to watch.
suspicion is he won't stick around. I just don't think he will. I think he's got other things on his mind. But usually it's sort of the long term MPs, because I mean he was an MP I think in like 2001, and they stepped down from Mayor of London, then he came back again. It's usually the MPs who've been around a long time who they're the ones who after they're prime minister they carry on as being an MP.
On Ben Harris, I've appreciated the time, man. Tell folks where they can find you on social media because I sure do enjoy interacting with you, and they can find your red hot Oriole baseball takes at weird hours of the morning.
Well, thank you for having me, and it's been a pleasure.
Ben Harris, our friend. Thank you so much, sir. Appreciate you.
Thank you for having me.
It's really interesting. Every time we do an episode of Heard Tell, that the more things look like they're different, the more you start seeing a little bit of similarities. And when it comes to the British system of government and the American system of government, there's a whole lot of differences. But there's also quite a few similarities, and not just because America came from England and we borrowed some of the principles from the English system to our own and added a lot of our own spins on things like liberties and freedoms. A blast to talk to somebody like Ben, who kind of sees our politics from a completely different point of view and from viewing it from over there in his own culture and his own country, and from a position of friendship because America and England have been such close allies and friends for many, many years now. It's always good, no matter how much we love our own country, and we do, especially on this 4th of July weekend when we're celebrating so much and appreciating getting all those freedoms fully back that we can enjoy with the end of the pandemic stuff, to look at it from an outside perspective and understand that things like our perception in the world really do matter. When we say things like America's the greatest nation on earth, or we're the shining city on the hill, or America exports freedom and liberty, we need to make sure those things actually mean what they mean. And when we have our own troubles, which we're always going to have, we should understand that those sorts of things matter to a wider world that looks to us to be a beacon of freedom. And in some ways, we're not doing a great job of that right now. So it's good to have an outside perspective. Friends hold each other accountable, and we should be a little bit of humility to understand that when we do something really, really off the charts bad, when a friend tells us we need to adjust, we probably can listen to them a little bit. And we want to tell them that we're aware of our own problems, and we will do better. Part of our Independence Day, we can appreciate all our freedoms and understand that we still got some work to do to make sure the future generations enjoy every bit of the freedoms that we have today, if not even more, because that's what we really ought to be having. Let it never be said that America is lacking in freedom. That's it for this edition of Heard Tell. We really appreciate all the kind words and gestures we've been getting in the feedback. You can find us at Heard Tell Show on the Twitter, heardtellshow@gmail.com if you want to email us. You can also leave comments wherever you're listening to this podcast. The YouTube page is a great place to leave comments. If you go on the YouTube page and listen to all the full episodes that are on there, leave a comment. We will respond to it, answer your questions, give you feedback. It was great when we first launched the YouTube page where there was folks on social media counting off, I'm number 1, I'm number 31, and things like that. You're a great audience. We greatly appreciate you. As long as you keep listening, we will keep making these programs. Now, there's a lot of exciting news after we get past the 4th of July holiday. We'll be bringing that to you shortly. Big changes that's going to be coming to this little platform, and we're looking forward to doing those for you. So until we talk to you next time, we really appreciate you checking out Heard Tell. Tell a friend about it. Leave comments. Leave ratings. Most of all, wherever you and yours are listening, across the street or around the world, thank you so much. Y'all take care of yourselves and each other until we talk next time. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.